Happy New Year, everyone. To end 2017, I decided to respond to one of the most 2017 videos there is. A member of the so-called skeptic community defending someone who outed herself as a Nazi. You may remember the RageAfterStorm fiasco where even right-wing nutjobs like Dave Cullen, aka Computing Forever, and Andy Worski were distancing themselves from her. But she still had her white knights. And in this case, we have someone who's even become a lol cow within his own community. No bullshit.
Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we're talking about the race realism debate that's been going on in the YouTube community for the last week or so, sparked by a supposedly racist video by RageAfterStorm called Race is Real, which mostly talks about racism, Africa, and the slave trade.
Supposedly racist. Two words that let you know where his sympathies lie. Once again, the skeptic community as a whole distanced themselves from her, including openly racist types like Computing Forever and Blonde in the Belly of the Beast. Rage went full Nazi and decided to quit the internet when it became apparent she couldn't turn the dog whistle into a tuba. I'll only be responding to no bullshit since I already debunked RageAfterStorm in an earlier video.
Well, this race is real stuff got really touchy for people when she brings up average IQs being lower for black people. Apparently people are cool with all the positive attributes in their race like being taller, stronger, and more athletic. People will easily admit blacks are more likely to be basketball players. But if you even mention that they're also lower IQ on average, it starts a whole shitstorm. Or maybe I should say, it starts a whole rage after shitstorm. But I digress.
And here we have the white supremacist dog whistles once again. Notice he mentioned average IQ lower for black people and blacks are better athletes. Those are primary white supremacist talking points. Reasons aren't given for these issues, so the people given these talking points are supposed to accept the idea of white man can't jump and black man can't think, that they barf up and want their listeners to accept at face value. Which many do, because their listeners are racist to some degree and want simple talking points instead of nuanced discussion. Much like a climate change denier who brings up the medieval warm period, or places that have recently had record lows, or unusually cold or snowy weather, so-called race realists tell you the bits of cherry-picked information that helps their conspiracy theory nonsense argument, while leaving out the important details.
Today we're going to briefly go over this drama, while also quickly and concisely going over the topics of race realism, average IQ, and things that lead to violent behavior. But let's start at the beginning. What is race realism anyway? Well, race realism is kind of just common sense. It is simply acknowledging that there are genetic differences between different racial groups.
Right there, no bullshit, like all shit for brains fascists, starts out with a huge affirming the consequent fallacy. He assumes that because there are variations between people, and that different races fit different statistical categories, that the races themselves are genetically different. Not only is this fallacious, but he's signifying that he believes that differences in these groups means that they should not live in the same locations. In other words, white nationalism.
People rarely dispute this when it comes to physical attributes, probably because it's too obvious for people to deny. For example, Dutch people are genetically taller than Koreans. Black people have darker skin than whites. These are differences and they're caused by genetics.
Melanin and average height differences have to do with environment, and to an extent, diet and living conditions. Southern Europeans tend to have darker skin than Northern Europeans, but that's because of the climates where they live. Height among Europeans until about 100 years ago was much less than it is today. You've heard about short medieval people. There's also height variations within groups. If it were entirely a group genetic thing, you wouldn't see basketball players like Yao Ming.
But when we examine differences in intelligence and behavior, that's when people tend to freak out, like what we've been seeing lately. The people who deny race realism, or the fact that IQ varies depending on race or background, they're just being timid PC pussies.
Oh look, edgelord alert.
In reality, it's unrealistic to think that every group would be equally good at everything. That's just not how evolution works. Now, to be fair, these observed differences are not entirely nature or nurture. They're a combination, but it is important for us to explore all the factors together in a constructive way. Shutting down discussions about genetics like this just pushes more people into the fringes, and it's not constructive for the discussion.
Assuming that races are genetic groups as in subspecies is a mistake that anthropologists made in the 19th century, and race realists like to hold on to that as if they were the only correct type of anthropology. Races aren't subspecies, especially considering there's no clear boundary line on what defines the races. The original Nazis didn't see Slavic people as white, which is ironic considering how many neo-Nazis of Slavic descent exist today. In fact, they were planning on exterminating Slavic people right after they had finished exterminating Jewish people. They had multiple final solutions planned. Also, there's the fact that many people in the Middle East look very much like Southern Europeans, and some countries like Georgia Georgia, and Armenia are technically not European, despite being thought of as part of Europe. There's also the ridiculous idea of the one-drop rule. It leads arguments over whether someone like Rebecca Hall is white, black, or mixed. There's so much wrong with so-called race realism that I wouldn't know where to begin, but I would suggest my response to Rage After Storm as a place to start.
In the book of IQ and the Wealth of Nations, it talks about the IQ of the average sub-Saharan African being at 80. The IQ of an African American is normally at 85. White populations in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Europe, South Africa, and the United States score really close to one another, being at around 100.
Please check out my video debunking your bullshit, linked below for reference. But to briefly recap, she implies strongly that it means genetics are at play, and not other factors. In other words, she believes people of color are genetically inferior when it comes to intelligence.
Let's talk about IQ, intelligence quotient. This has been the main focus of this current discussion, but I don't think anyone really cared to explain or talk about what IQ is anyway. It's really not the same thing as intelligence or being smart. The way I've always understood it, IQ measures your aptitude or talent. That's your natural ability to learn or gain knowledge. You're born with it. Actual intelligence or smarts, on the other hand, that's knowledge and skills you've learned over time. And that's really how you would rank how smart a person is in the real world. For example, a low IQ person can become a genius if they study and try hard enough. And on the flip side, a high IQ person can amount to shit if they don't apply their learning abilities to school or field work.
IQ can be affected by environment. There are some genetic factors with individuals, but it can also be impacted by how your mental state is that day, how alert you are, if you're taking the test in a place that causes stress and anxiety. It can make someone who would normally test at an IQ of 140 test at an IQ of 110, for example. Even putting that aside, IQ isn't even a fully accurate measure of cognitive ability. Albert Einstein only had an IQ of 160, while there are people who would blow him out of the water when it comes to IQ testing who, despite their best efforts, couldn't even come close to accomplishing what he has. On the other end of the IQ spectrum, we have Andy Warhol, who is said to have an IQ of 86, but has had such an impact on the art world that it's irrelevant what his IQ is.
No, not that field work. Lord gon' pick a bale of cotton. God, that's racist.
Mouth breather.
So right from the start on this IQ discussion, the whole idea of IQ has been misconstrued. This idea that saying blacks are lower IQ on average makes them dumb and inferior is just flawed.
The first smart thing you've said. There are many factors that go into IQ test results, so yes, it's flawed at best and malicious at worst to say that an average lower IQ among groups means they're genetically less intelligent. Let's see where you go with this.
It's coming from knee-jerk defensive reactions from black people, and it's coming from timid, cucked-up white people who are too afraid to admit these truths and offend people. It's funny how the edgy skeptic YouTubers turn into SJWs as soon as you start talking about the differences between races.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong. You managed to not just go downhill, but drive off a fucking cliff into the ocean below, where your car is swept away by the currents further out to sea, where its final resting place will be on the abyssal plane of the ocean floor. Congratulations. That's quite an accomplishment, Mr. Bullshit.
These recent debunking videos of Rage After Storm have been laughable at best. They provide no evidence and use straw men against her. For example, she never brings up superiority or inferiority at all.
Seriously? You're gonna say that in a video where she said black people are incapable of abstract thought? There's feigning ignorance, and there's bull-faced lies. You, Mr. Bullshit, did the latter.
She's mostly talking about IQ and intelligence, on average. They also like to attack Rage's sources, rather than talk about the scientific facts. But guys, come on, it doesn't matter what shitty sources may have been listed. A lot of the points Rage made have truth to them.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Bigfoot is real. It's a scientific fact because I said so. Who cares if the footage is blurry and it's been proven to be just a guy in a suit or crappy video footage of a bear? A lot of people believe in it and can argue a case for why they believe in it. Therefore, it must be true.
And if the nerds complain about sources ever cared to look, there are plenty out there that support what Rage and other race realists are saying. The Bell Curve, for example, broached this subject over 23 years ago. This is the book that sparked much of this debate and controversy in the 90s. And it's not only about IQ related to genetics, it also covers environmental and socioeconomic factors. Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this book here, but anyone who's been to college should have heard about this shit. And it's extremely troubling when most of the people attacking Rage After Storm's points haven't even fucking heard of it.
Do you like cherry pie, Mr. Bullshit? You should ask Rage to bake you one with all the cherry picking she did and her statistics from her sources, some of which destroyed her own argument. She, like other white supremacists, who used science that was debunked before the Wright brothers' first flight with their airplane, look for stuff that backs up her claims, quote mines, cherry picks, and cobbles it together like a racist Frankenstein monster and throws a sheet over it.
But I honestly think that the subject matter is more important of an issue than this girl choosing bad sources. I mean, we all know the Daily Stormer is garbage, so...
Yeah.
But, like, you know, the bell curve does not get a mention here, which is interesting.
So, yeah, what's the bell curve? You know, I've heard about it. I was reading up a little bit on it yesterday when people were bringing up. Like, what is this exactly?
Sorry, Andy. I love you, bro, but that's pretty embarrassing. You can't talk about race realism without even knowing what the hell the bell curve is.
Andy Worski is an idiot. Even when he's right about something, he's annoying and sounds like a fool. AIU is, well, AIU.
And Second Clancy appears to be missing the point in his video today, too.
A YouTuber by the name of RageAfterStorm made a video called Race is Real, in which he tries to say that the general IQ difference between blacks and whites, as well as violence and crime rates, is not due to environmental factors, but to genetic factors.
And look, these guys are my bros, and they've both been on the show here before, so you know me calling them out means something. They know nothing about this topic and are most likely having timid, knee-jerk reactions to the realization that black people are lower IQ on average. Fortunately, Andy appears to have figured it out in the rest of his livestream from a few days ago. But Clancy came out with this shit video today, a few hours ago, so I don't know what his excuse is. It's probably because he's vegan and his brain isn't getting enough Naruto nutrients. Sorry, bro.
Actually, Clancy did a great job debunking that pile of racist bullshit. I'll get this out of the way right now. I disagree a lot with Clancy's anti-SJW and anti-feminist stances, but a good video is a good video regardless of the source.
Next, let's go back to Andy Worski's livestream about this for another minute, which I'm gonna link with all the other videos below.
Notice how Mr. Bullshit goes right back to Andy's blunderfest, because he knows outside of just saying, well, Clancy's wrong because I say so, he can't refute the video. He knows Rage got destroyed, so he has nowhere to go from here except back to an easy target.
After they get past the average IQ thing, which we all have here now, the next step is to address the implications of a group having lower IQ. And this is another point people hated on Rage about too. Does low IQ lead to more violent, destructive behaviors? Probably, and this is another point where people will love to call you a racist for recognizing it.
And the dog whistle turns into a tuba with this one. Brooks states right out that he thinks black people are genetically predispositioned to committing crime, even though there are plenty of safe communities with a large African-American population, and some very unsafe predominantly white cities. Poorer white cities also have a lower IQ on average. A high crime rate has nothing to do with skin color, and everything to do with living conditions. Poorer urban areas are the kind of environment where people turn to crime as a means of survival. The idea that someone is predetermined to live a certain life is a very Calvinist mindset that should have died out centuries ago, but it still lives today.
Also in that stream, AIU brings up a great point here with Andy. Blacks genetically have higher testosterone. There's no scientist or legitimate doctor out there who would deny this. And higher T leads to more aggressive, violent behaviors. This is why men fight more than women on average. More T. And so, it's part of the reason blacks resort to violence more on average. Higher testosterone. Combine that with lower IQ and now we're starting to get somewhere.
Another study says that estrogen levels differ, but not testosterone. What you're doing here is the opposite of the scientific method. You formed a conclusion, you're looking for information that fits that conclusion, rejecting the information that doesn't, and using that to piece together a patchwork quilt of bad arguments. This is pseudo-science. Racist, outdated pseudo-science from an era where the average life expectancy, even if you correct for infant mortality rates, was around 60 years old. You probably slept through 4th grade when they went over the scientific method, but just a refresher in case your audience is watching. You first define a question, gather information, form a hypothesis, test it with experiments, and collecting data in a reproducible manner, analyze the data, interpret the data, and draw conclusions that serve as a starting point for the new hypothesis, publish results, and retest and adjust your hypothesis as necessary, starting over from step 1 as needed. You, Mr. Bullshit, seem to have started at step 6 with a preconceived conclusion, worked your way backwards to step 3, skipping steps 4 and 5, and stopped at step 2. So-called race realism is real racism, nothing more. This kind of pseudoscience that passes for skepticism these days is the exact same kind of shit that the skeptic community debunked and laughed at years ago. And now you're peddling that exact same garbage, you racist piece of shit.
The last part of this equation really seals the deal. A lot of American blacks have a chip on their shoulders about race, especially against white people.
Gee, I wonder why. Could it be there's a systematic form of oppression in society where one group, called white people, are taught that they're on top, and that black people are below them through subtle forms of discrimination, such as viewing things black people like as a lesser product, all the while vile racist fascist scumbags like yourself continue to justify this behavior? Could it be the police are prejudiced against black people, and white people blame black people for getting shot when they're reaching for their wallet? Could it be that black people are given harsher sentences for the same crime? Could it be that racist white people hate Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee during the anthem, claiming he was disrespecting the flag, all the while doing so themselves like hypocritical pieces of dried bird shit? Could it be that black people with names deemed black are more likely to be passed over for a job? Could it be that the whole war on drugs was designed as an excuse to put black people, who were the primary consumers of marijuana in the 20s and 30s, in jail for wanting to catch a nice mellow buzz? Could it be that white people equate Black Lives Matter with the KKK, even though one is a civil rights group and the other is a terrorist group that, if anything, should be equated with ISIS? Could it be that black people go into sports because society tells them it's the best way for them to escape poverty? Could it be that black people are just fucking sick and tired of being told that they're second-class citizens in their own country and that they need to accept racism because other places have it worse? Nah, it's gotta be genetics.
I mean, let's be real here. If you're white, you're on the defensive. Now, I'll admit the black inferiority complex makes sense sometimes. There's been a long history of racism here, and it's very hard to get past and forget about that. But this chip on their shoulder also causes a lot of them to have this inferiority complex. This makes black people defensive and likely to lash out on people who bring up shit like lower IQ.
Gee, I wonder why black people get angry at being told they're stupid by white people. The same stupid white people who get a free pass because they're white, doing profoundly stupid things all the time. But the second a black person does something stupid, white people condemn all black people, and racist turds like yourself say, well, they're just not smart enough to know better, which is the gist of what you're saying, whether you admit it or not.
On the flip side, this anger and animosity certainly isn't coming from the top down. Besides the occasional white supremacist, no one is coming at this argument from a superiority complex. Whites, Jews, and Asians who are at the top of the IQ spectrum, they're not claiming to be superior here to feel better. We're just looking at studies and acknowledging facts. No, it's the black community on the bottom of the IQ range.
There you go again with that racist bullshit. Fun fact, did you know that the average IQ in Madagascar isn't that far behind that of some European nations? Madagascar has a history that doesn't involve as much forced colonization and territory lines drawn by white people. At one time, it was the most well-off nation in Africa, and if not for a period of brutal dictatorship that they are now just recovering from, their IQ would likely be on par with Europe's. Sierra Leone has an average IQ of 91, which is on par with some European nations. If IQ was a genetic thing determined by skin color, the variations wouldn't be so high. And once again, IQ isn't the end-all be-all of cognitive ability. Environment is a huge factor.
The ones who want to deny this shit even exists. They're denying science because they're so worried about looking inferior, and it's a little sad. There's nothing wrong with admitting your race or gender is lower in something on average. Asians are shorter, whites are paler, girls are weaker, and men are the best. That's not a good example.
In your mind, only white men are the best, right? You see white men as the gold standard, as do many white people, and you continue to push pseudo-science as legitimate science.
What I'm trying to say here is this whole debate is kind of a non-controversy, if you will. The only real problem here is some people are scared to admit scientific facts because it may hurt other people's feelings. And all I have to say to that is, grow the fuck up.
I'm gonna let you in on a little secret, Mr. Bullshit. Just because it offends people doesn't make it a scientific fact. You could say the world is 6,000 years old, and do the whole creationist bit of sophistry trying to say that science proves the Christian God, and the Bible literally true, and all that useless garbage. But in the end, it's still bullshit. On the other hand, you get offended when Milo Stewart said that all white people are racist, which I might add was strawmanned, as he was talking about subconscious bias. But that's not the topic at hand. Since you were offended, does that mean Milo Stewart was right? Going by your logic, he was, as you seem to believe that offending people makes you right.
In the end, race is real, genetics are real, and genes that provide high intelligence are real, and they're concentrated in white and Asian populations. That's why the world's greatest civilizations have developed in Europe, North America, and Asia, and not Africa. I know some people are uncomfortable stating or hearing that, but I'm not. I live in the real world, and I hardly care who the fuck I might offend.
In the end, Mr. Bullshit is full of bullshit. Whilst white knighting for his distressed Nazi damsel RageAfterStorm, he dropped the dog whistle, replaced it with a tuba, then later dropped the tuba and replaced it with an air horn. The myth that only Europe and Asia had great civilizations is a racist myth that needs to just fucking die already. Of course, there's the obvious Maya, Aztec, and Inca empires in the Americas, but there's also the Kingdom of Nigeria, Aksum, Kush, the Mali Empire, the Kingdom of Ghana, the Nox civilization. Need I go on? One good thing I can say about Mr. Bullshit is that he is so profoundly stupid that even his own community thinks of him as a lol cow.
Now, it is my opinion that No Bullshit is a talentless, intellectually dishonest hack. And a lot of other things, if you couldn't tell from the title of this video. He's the kind of person who has wedded himself to a narrative because it's easy, because it's comfortable. Completely lacking in any form of conviction or character to speak of, No Bullshit is only interested in confirming the biases of his audience over and over again.
Shuan had even made a thread dunking on him once. He's every bad anti-SJW stereotype rolled into one, filling the role that Red Pill Philosophy once filled, before he became so irrelevant that his videos only average about 10,000 views apiece, despite amassing over 200,000 subscribers. Until next time, I'm Danny Quartz, wishing all of you a Happy New Year.